Hello Year 8. Today we are going to be building on our understanding of the Industrial Revolution, but also taking a bit of a step back. We're sticking in a similar time period, but we're going to be looking at the origins of the British Empire. Now that's because very soon we're going to be moving on to enslaved people, and that should all of this should help us to be able to understand that in a bit more detail. So the first thing I'd like you to do today is to answer those questions. What do you understand by the term empire? So what is an empire? What do you think it means? And how do you think a country builds an empire? So pause here, complete those questions, and then come back. So I've got here some key word definitions that should help you to build on your understanding of what an empire is. So what I'd like you to do, please, is to copy these down onto your books. So you have the word empire. So an empire is a group of countries or states that are ruled by a single monarch or empire or emperor. So they're ruled by one person. A colony is an area of land settled by and under the control of people from the same country. So people may set up colonies within the empire. So for example, in the British Empire, people set up colonies in America and in places like India as well. And that's where the word colonisation comes from. These British people going off and creating colonies is an act of colonisation or colonialism. And then finally, one that is useful for you to know is the New World. So this was a name that was given to the Americas, and I mean the Americas in terms of North and South America. And that's during the colonisation by Europeans in the 16th century, so the 1500s. So pause here, write down those definitions, and if you'd like to, you can add some dual coding or some pictures to the definition of each term to show your understanding. So what I have here for you is a map. We're going to look at where the British Empire was. This is a map of the world, so you've got lots of different parts, and what I would like you to do now is to use this map to help you to describe the locations of the British Empire. So you can use your geographical skills, think about that clock technique that you use in geography, to be able to describe the locations of the British Empire. If you want to take it a step further, you could talk about when those places were colonised. So I've got some sentence starters here for you to use, and all you need to do is to identify the areas in which the British colonised. So we've got places in Australia. If we're going to say here, I wouldn't say Asia, I'd be much more specific. If we're talking about Africa, which parts of Africa, whereabouts. The same for the Americas, so which parts of America, and maybe even when. Okay, so pause here, write down your explanation of the location of the British Empires, and then come back. So one place that we're going to look at is the colonisation of America. But why? Why would the British colonise America? Interestingly, the British Empire didn't exist in the medieval period, but England was at times a part of other empires. So after the Norman conquest, it became part of a Norman empire, and you will have looked at the Norman conquest in year 7. And it was also part of a French empire in between the years 1150 1254 to 1216. So these medieval empires existed, but they were really small in comparison to the British Empire. The British Empire began to grow during the 16th century. So after Columbus explored the Americas, so he went off and explored the Americas after 1492, lots of other European travellers and explorers wanted to find out more about the Americas. And one group that did that really successfully were the Spanish. And they controlled huge territories, particularly in South America. And it made Spain very, very rich because there were huge quantities of gold and silver that they could trade. So English monarchs see this wealth and they want to begin to imitate that success. So what Elizabeth does is she sends off explorers, so people like Francis Drake, who we've come across before, and Walter Raleigh. Both claimed territory for England on the Pacific coast of America. So if we go back to our map on this bit here, okay, and now really interestingly, one set up by Walter Raleigh was called Roanoke, in an area that he named Virginia after the Virgin Queen. And it's really interesting. If you wanted to find more out about that, you might like to look at the 13 lost colonies, because they just disappeared and no one knows why. But what I want you to do is to think about why Elizabeth might want to have colonies in America. So think about what Spain are up to. Think about what you already know about Elizabeth as well. So you know that she had conflict with Spain. You know that she didn't want them to become too rich or powerful. We also know that we have this Catholic empire being built up. And remember that Elizabeth is a Protestant, so she's going to try and challenge that as well. So think about what I've just said there, and I would like you, please, to write an answer to this question. Why would Elizabeth want to have colonies in America? So 2 to 3 sentences. Try and give me more than one reason, and you are going to write in full sentences. So Elizabeth might want to have colonies in America because. So pause here, answer that question, and then come back. The first most successful colony in North America was a place called Jamestown. So this is just after Elizabeth. King James I succeeds Elizabeth to the throne. And it was founded in 1607 by members of something called the Virginia Company. So the Virginia Company were a trade company, and it's where the term Virginia tobacco comes from as well, which will be important soon. And they set up basically to establish settlements in America. They discovered really quickly that this particular crop was known and used by the natives, so we're thinking Native Americans here, and that crop is tobacco. So over time these plantations develop, and by 1621 Virginia was supporting 160,000 kilograms of tobacco per year to Britain, and that's huge. So before that people hadn't really smoked in Britain. This is where this kind of smoking idea comes from. So England's second colony was set up in around about 1620. They were originally aiming for Virginia, but they were blown off course and they landed in an area that has now become known as New England, and they named a new colony and they called it Plymouth. So the coast of New England had really, really good fishing, and by the 1680s there were loads of barrels of fish and dried cod being sent to Britain, and more British people started to think that they could make a new life for themselves in America. This meant that by 1700, over 700,000 people had emigrated from Britain and more colonies were founded. Between 1607 and 1732, there were 13 colonies established by the British on the North American Atlantic coast. So this area of America is effectively owned or colonized by Britain. And this is where the American War of Independence comes from as well. They were fighting against the British. So the colonists also, importantly, included some people who had no choice about whether or not to go to America. And it's really important that we know and understand that there were some people who were forced to go there against their will. So these include enslaved Africans who were brought to Jamestown to work on the tobacco farms. And it also includes convicts. So people who had committed crimes were sent off and they were transported to places like America and also Australia as part of their punishment. And they were sent there to do forced labour. So what I want you to do now is to read through the information that you've been given. You have a PDF and it repeats some of the information that I've just said to you, as well as some information about the kinds of people that were going there and why. And I would like you to use that information to complete the following tasks. So first of all, you need to use figure 5.3, which has the pictures of the Virginia Company, King James, the indentured labourers and the Pilgrim Fathers, and I would like you to use that plus any of your previous knowledge to list as many reasons as you can why people supported colonisation in America. So pause here, complete that task, and then come back for your second task. So your next task is to think about how far you agree that British colonisation was entirely as a result of the desire for wealth. So what I mean there is, were people just colonising places for wealth, or were there other reasons? You might like to think about religious reasons. You might like to think about ideas of power over other countries as well. So think about why the British might want to colonise other places, and was it just for wealth? If you finish those within the time that you're given, there is a challenge for you to have a go at, and that is this one here. So at the time, people would have celebrated Britain's empire. So people in Britain would have been really proud of the empire. Nowadays, that's slightly different. So why do you think attitudes towards the British Empire have changed in recent years? So perhaps think about some recent events, things that have maybe gone on in Bristol, things that have gone on internationally that might help you to explain why colonialism and why taking over other people's countries might be frowned upon today. So, by the end of today's lesson, you should have completed these tasks. You should have described the location of the British Empire over time. You should have described how or why the British Empire began, and you should have explained the different reasons why the British colonised America. If you have any questions, please get in touch with your teacher and make sure that your work is submitted via Satchel 1. Good luck!